It's fascinating to watch how relationships evolve, isn't it? I mean, what one generation thinks is normal can feel completely different to the next.
Absolutely.
And if you've ever wondered about, the changing ways young people connect, especially around intimacy, well, you're definitely not alone.
Hmm.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack the topics that are really shaping things today.
And today, yeah, we're taking a close look at something that's become a huge talking point in that evolution, hookup culture.
Hookup culture.
Right. So what exactly are we talking about here? Based on the insights we've gathered, it generally refers to connections that prioritize, let's say, physical intimacy without the expectation of deep emotional stuff or, long-term commitment.
Got it. No strings attached, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. Or at
Yeah.
least fewer strings.
Okay. And for this deep dive, we've got a really interesting resource, right? An audio recording.
Yes, exactly. It's a discussion among young people in Vietnam,
Mhm.
specifically from Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. So we're going to be hearing their direct experiences, their perspectives on this whole thing.
Great. So we get it straight from them.
That's the plan. Our goal today is really to understand hookup culture through their eyes. We'll dig into how widespread they feel it is, the reasons behind it, the different ways it sort of shows up,
Mm.
any potential risks they see, and what this all kind of suggests about how young people in Vietnam are navigating relationships now.
Okay. Let's get into it then. How common is this, really, among young folks in Vietnam right now? It sounds like it's maybe a fairly recent thing.
That's right. Yeah, one of the speakers mentioned that just a few years back, this kind of non-committal connecting wasn't nearly as visible.
Really?
Yeah. But they noted a big increase lately, so much so that there are now social media groups specifically set up to, well, facilitate these kinds of meetups.
Wow. Okay. Dedicated groups. That definitely shows a shift.
It really does.
Well,
Highlights how much things have changed, and quickly.
so when did this trend really start to, pick up steam in Vietnam?
The discussion suggests it began maybe about 10 years ago. Initially, it seems, within a smaller group, maybe more open-minded people,
Uh-huh.
probably influenced by exposure to foreign media, maybe interactions with international students, that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
And interestingly, there was a bit of a geographical pattern. It seemed to start in the South, which is often seen as, a bit more open to new ideas, and then it gradually moved north, where maybe there was a bit more initial hesitation.
Okay.
One person actually remembered it popping up in Hanoi around 2015.
2015 in Hanoi. Okay. So it's not just one single type of thing, this hookup culture. What different forms does it take? What did they talk about?
Yeah, good question. They highlighted several kinds. You've got friends with benefits, obviously. They use the Vietnamese phrase "làm bạn và làm tin," which basically means, being friends and also having sex.
Right.
Then there are one-night stands, tin mot dem, and also these sort of unclear relationships. Maybe there's some affection, but it's primarily about meeting sexual needs. A bit ambiguous.
Ambiguous. Yeah, sounds tricky to navigate.
It can be.
And what's the common thread? The thing that links all these different versions?
Well, the constant factor seems to be that lack of deep emotional commitment. And a primary focus on immediate needs could be sexual, or sometimes they even mention tied to material benefits.
Okay, interesting. That gives us a clearer picture of the what. But let's talk about the why. Why are young people actively choosing these non-committal connections? What's driving it?
Right. Several key reasons came out of the discussion. A really big one was just time constraints, busy lives, demanding careers.
Yeah, the classic pressure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Many young people feel they just don't have the bandwidth, for the emotional investment and the sheer time that traditional long-term relationships often need. It fits a pattern we see in lots of busy urban places.
That definitely rings true. I hear that a lot. What else?
Another thing was maybe a lack of confidence in forming those really deep, lasting connections, or maybe a reluctance to get too vulnerable with someone.
Fear of vulnerability.
Yeah. Some people said they're mainly looking to meet specific needs, maybe occasional emotional sharing or sexual intimacy, but without any pressure for it to turn into something more serious.
Right.
And interestingly, some flat out said they just have no interest in a traditional romantic relationship right now.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a statement against the usual expectations, I suppose.
It is. And money came up too. Financial stuff.
Ah, the practicalities.
Yeah, the cost of traditional dating, going out, gifts, all that. It can be a real strain, especially if you're just starting out or maybe not feeling financially secure.
Sure. Makes sense.
And then there's just the desire for freedom, wanting to avoid the responsibilities, the expectations that often come with commitment. constant texting, needing to meet up frequently.
Yeah, the relationship admin, as some might call it.
Exactly that, avoiding the perceived overhead.
Oh,
And linked to that vulnerability point earlier, there's the fear of getting hurt,
no.
potential heartbreak from serious relationships. Hookups were sometimes framed as like a way to get intimacy without such high emotional stakes, almost like insurance.
Insurance against pain. Mm.
Kind of.
Mm.
For others, it's maybe about avoiding the effort of building something new after bad experiences in the past,
Right. Just easier not to start.
perhaps.
Mm.
And finally, some just want to, explore, have different life experiences before maybe thinking about settling down, marriage, that sort of thing.
It really paints a picture of young people trying to figure things out amidst a lot of pressures, personal and societal.
Hmm.
Okay, so looking at these non-committal interactions themselves, what about safety, security? Were there different takes on that?
Yeah, definitely contrasting ideas there. One viewpoint was that these relationships are inherently kind of risky, emotionally, potentially physically too, just because you don't know the person that well, there's no deep commitment. And this, unfortunately, can lead to situations like, well, unknowingly getting involved with someone who's married. They mentioned Ngotin, which apparently has legal implications in Vietnam regarding marriage law.
Oh, how?
Yeah, and someone shared a pretty impactful personal story about discovering their partner was actually married.
Gosh, yeah. That really hits home the potential for really difficult, harmful situations. But you said there was another side.
There was. The other perspective suggested that the lack of obligation, in a way, can make them feel safer.
How so?
The argument was, well, without the weight of commitment, it might actually be easier to end things if problems come up, or if someone just feels uncomfortable. Less messy, perhaps.
I see the logic, kind of. What about the more direct physical safety stuff?
Yeah, that was definitely discussed. Significant risks around STIs, unintended pregnancies. This often connects to maybe not having all the info about sexual health or not consistently using protection, especially among younger people.
A major concern.
Absolutely. And then there's just the general risk of physical harm from partners whose intentions or boundaries aren't totally clear, given you might not know them very well.
So, a lot to think about there. Let's shift a bit to commitment and trust. How do those ideas even work in these non-committal setups?
Well, the discussion brought up this idea of agreements, setting expectations up front.
Like a contract.
Sort of, but maybe less formal. More about clarifying things like how often will we contact each other, what kind of contact, what's the level of emotional intimacy, if any. And crucially, the understanding that either person can walk away any time without major drama or obligation.
Sounds very transactional compared to how we usually think of relationships.
It's pretty different, yeah. In serious committed relationships, the foundation is usually that emotional connection, deep trust.
Right.
In that context, constantly checking up or needing formal agreements about terms, that would probably feel like trust is missing.
Yeah, it would undermine the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One person shared an example of being in a long-distance committed relationship that worked purely because of mutual trust, not because they had strict rules or constant monitoring.
So is trust just totally absent in hookups then? Or is it just different?
I think it's just different. It's not entirely absent, but it operates on another level. It's more like trusting the other person's basic decency, maybe.
Yeah.
Trusted them to be safe, to respect the boundaries you both agreed on.
Okay.
It's not that deep, all-encompassing trust you'd find or hope to find in a committed partnership.
Right, different levels of trust for different situations. Now, it's interesting to think, can these more casual things ever become something serious? Is hookup culture sometimes maybe a pathway to a traditional relationship?
Yeah, another point where views really diverged. One perspective was, absolutely, it can happen.
Yeah.
And often this was put down to D and so, that idea of destiny or fate.
Destiny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone actually shared a personal story. Started on a dating app. Intention was casual, but it ended up becoming a 4-year relationship and even an engagement.
Wow, so it does happen. That smart can still ignite, even if that wasn't the plan.
Exactly. That genuine connection can still pop up unexpectedly.
But there was an opposing view.
Yes. The other side pointed out that, look, the way these dating apps are designed, their algorithms, they often match people who say they want the same thing. So if everyone's there for casual, maybe it's less likely.
The tech pushes you towards similar intentions.
Kind of. But they did concede that, sure, unexpected emotional connections can still form. It's not impossible. especially if maybe one or both people are actually looking for a bit more than just sex, even if they started casually.
Uh-huh.
In fact, there's another anecdote about friends who connected online just for emotional support initially.
Hmm.
So, yeah, not all non-committal connections are purely physical.
That leads nicely into the role of social media and dating apps. Did the people in the discussion feel these platforms caused hookup culture to rise, or did they just make it easier, more visible?
Good question. One view is that these platforms have definitely played a big role in spreading more open-minded ideas about relationships. They make the whole concept more widely known, maybe more accepted.
Normalizing it in a way.
Yeah, but there was also a note of caution. If people rely too much on social media trends, maybe they lose their own conviction. Just following the crowd.
Right, so the platforms amplify it, but don't necessarily create the desire itself.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
The other perspective was more that these platforms are mainly just providing a more convenient, maybe safer alternative to how people might have found casual encounters before. Thinking about things like, say, sex work.
Okay.
These apps offer more choice and ideally allow for mutual consent between people looking for the same thing.
Right, shifting how those connections are made. Now, a worry you sometimes hear is about the impact on attitudes towards serious relationships. Is there a concern that hookup culture makes young people, I don't know, more easygoing, maybe too casual about commitment, or less willing to put in the effort for something long term?
Yeah, that concern came up. But there was a strong counter-argument presented,
Oh.
which was that actually engaging in non-committal relationships can be seen as valuable life experience.
Well, so?
It can help people learn more about themselves, what they want, what their boundaries are, what they're really looking for in a partner. So potentially, it could even prepare them better for a serious relationship down the line.
Interesting. So it could be a kind of relationship self-discovery phase.
Sort of, yeah.
Ah.
That was the idea. And the point was also made that, look, whether someone is ready and willing to commit seriously, that ultimately comes down to their personal values, their willingness to compromise, to accept what commitment involves. It doesn't necessarily depend only on whether they've experienced hookup culture or not.
So it's more about individual readiness than the path taken.
That was definitely a key takeaway from that part of the discussion.
Okay. So as we kind of start to wrap up the main points here,
Mhm.
what were the overall concluding thoughts from the guests in the recording? What was the general vibe?
Well, overall, the feeling seemed to be that hookup culture itself isn't inherently bad or good. But, and this was stressed, people who participate really need to approach it with openness, understanding, definitely safe practices.
Crucial.
Absolutely. And mutual consent. That was highlighted as absolutely essential. Clear, enthusiastic consent from everyone involved.
Right.
The point was also made that, different ways of connecting have always existed. Modern tech just offers new ways to meet various needs, physical, emotional, whatever they might be.
New tools for old needs, perhaps.
You could say that. It's also worth mentioning one participant specifically said they personally wouldn't choose to engage in hookup culture, but they fully respected other people's right to make their own choices.
So a sense of live and let live, but with caution.
Exactly. It really boils down to individual choice and making sure you engage responsibly.
Yeah.
It really showed the huge range of perspectives and experiences just within this group of young people in Vietnam navigating this changing relationship landscape.
It's become really clear in this deep dive that this rise of non-committal relationships, well, it's complex. It's multifaceted.
Definitely.
We've heard about so many different motivations, and as we heard directly from those young people in Vietnam, the outcomes, the personal feelings about it all, they're incredibly varied.
hmm And ultimately, as our guest really underscored, the choices we make about relationships, they're deeply personal, aren't they?
They have to be.
Yeah. And the most critical thing seems to be making sure those choices are informed ones
Yeah.
and that we take responsibility for what might happen, especially around safety and well-being.
Well said. Thank you for joining us today as we explored these really insightful perspectives on how young people in Vietnam are navigating modern relationships.
My pleasure. And now, maybe just a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. As social norms keep shifting and new technologies keep popping up, how is our basic understanding of intimacy and connection going to continue to change? What might be the longer-term ripple effects on society from these ongoing shifts in how we relate to each other? It's definitely something we're thinking about.